Welcome to the Lawyer for Me podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lawyer for Me podcast with attorney Kim Kollmeyer. Kim is a Missouri attorney who helps individuals and families navigate difficult legal situations, including divorce, custody, and juvenile cases. She works closely with her clients from start to finish, so they don't have to go through the process alone. I'm Sean O'Connor, and today, Kim and I are talking about what to expect at the start of a family court case in Missouri. And I'm assuming we're going to get into some, how do we get here kind of a thing. Hi, Kim. How are you?
I'm well, sir. How are you today?
I am, I'm a 9 out of 10. I'm going to go with that.
Fantastic.
How do you end up, what leads up, how did we get here? You're filing a family court case in Missouri. What triggers that?
I mean, I think that we have to remember that there's the non-legal factors that trigger the legal factors, right? There has been some kind of a relationship, and that relationship is dissolving. And we don't necessarily know what has led for that to happen. But especially where we're talking about kids, and most of my practice has to do with kids, we've got two people who are probably very attached to two kids, who have rights to those kids, and then begin to pull those kids back and forth between them. And so whatever it is that has happened has led people to rushing to lawyers' offices, pleading with how do I protect my rights? How do I protect my child? How do I ensure that my child is safe and my relationship with my child is safe?
Mm-hmm. Stressful.
It is.
A lot of emotions, as you said. We got people involved. It's going to be messy. That's something we can count on.
It is.
From the very beginning, what usually gets filed to start the case? What does that step involve?
So you will see cases where people are married, and you see cases where people aren't married. And so where there's a marriage, you see a divorce, and the divorce deals with custody, and the divorce also deals with property. When people are not married in the state of Missouri, those cases are handled as a paternity matter. And that's not necessarily disputing the actual paternity of who the parents are. Now, sometimes it does. Right. But generally speaking, you're looking for a court order that these are the parents. And then from there, they will go into what custody should look like, what child support should look like, what visitation looks like. When people are married, there is a presumption of parentage. But when they're not married, that presumption's not there. So from the outset, there's going to be filings of the dissolution of marriage. And there's going to be a request for temporary custody. There's going to be a parenting plan. With a paternity action, you're going to see similar filings, but it's going to be a petition for paternity, and then the motion for temporary custody and a parenting plan. You'll see some income and expense forms that get filed with those, because we've got to talk about what child support looks like. The income and expense form can become complicated because you got to look at pay stubs and you got to look at deductions, and you're figuring out, how much this person is making and how much this person is spending. And where you're looking at a divorce, you'll also be looking at assets.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot. That makes sense. And I'm assuming, this gets filed by someone on one side of the case, so to speak. And how does the other side get notified? They're like, honey, I'm going to file some papers. I'll be home in an hour. But it's like, how quickly does that usually happen?
You know what? If the parties are able to communicate at all, I usually encourage people to communicate that this is happening, because when it comes as a surprise, then people get upset and then people react. And not to say that it's not upsetting when you know it's coming, but when the sheriff shows up to serve you papers, that can be embarrassing or awkward, and certainly it can be a lot less embarrassing or less emotional if you know it's coming. So sometimes both sides file at the same time, and then we have competing cases and we have to consolidate those. When a case is filed, we are required to notify the other side. You can't just go filing lawsuits and people don't know that lawsuits have been filed. Now, I've had cases where the other side, they've been split up for years and years and years, and they're really not sure where the other side is. And in situations like that, you'll see publication in the newspaper, and there are mechanisms for doing that. But generally speaking, we can hire a special process server, or we can use the local sheriff, and we can schedule service. And so we request a subpoena, or for that matter, if the parties are getting along at all, they can waive service. If they've got an attorney on the other side, that attorney can accept service, and then it's not necessary to send the sheriff out. But once a person has been served, they have 30 days to file a response. So, while emotionally we have this panic moment, oh my gosh, I just got served papers, you don't have to file a response today. And just because someone has alleged something doesn't automatically make it true. So people read the papers and they get mad about the papers. Okay, you got 30 days. Let's find a lawyer. Let's get a response put together.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I have some lived experience with that. I was in a relationship, not married. We have a wonderful daughter. And there was a point where, when we split up, there was, she called me and she said, hey, just so you know, you're going to be served. It was just like a heads up, like, don't panic. This is just a part of the process to document everything we need to, we were in communication. And I was like, oh, thanks for the heads up. Yeah, because for sure it's emotional. And if I had gotten papers handed to me at my door, I'd have been like, we're not doing this friendly, or.
Right? Absolutely. If they can communicate at all, it's worth so much. And truly, it's when you go into trial and the judge has to make a decision, the judge doesn't know all of the facts of any one individual's life, right? And he doesn't know that this child has a special medical need, or that child is really good at piano and that we have piano 3 days a week, or whatever. And the lawyers try really hard to bring those issues up, but then, parenting plans get written that don't necessarily work well because of special needs or special situations. And if the parents are able to communicate, then we can negotiate and work out terms that tend to work better. But that requires, at least to some degree, some amount of communication.
Yeah, I'm guessing that if communication channels are completely broken down and the court's just going to decide something, it's not going to be customized, I guess is what I'm saying.
No, and it's extremely emotionally demanding. Trials are very difficult to go through, to air all of your personal business to complete strangers in a public setting. And relationships, people love each other, then they hate each other. It's just really, really hard to present all of that. And in the meantime, there's this important factor, right? There's these kids, and some of these we don't have kids and people are struggling over property, but when kids are involved, this child is so important to both parties. It just becomes incredibly emotionally demanding.
Once both sides are involved, Kim, everybody's, gotten their papers, the cases moving forward. What does the court typically start doing early on?
The court doesn't necessarily have to be overly involved from the outset. So what you'll see amongst the lawyers is that they will begin what's going to be called a discovery process, where they're going to pass requests back and forth between them, trying to learn information. So you'll see interrogatories and a request for production of documents, and then each side will have 30 days to respond, and extensions can be requested. But in the interrogatories, you're going to start with stuff that's as simple as what's your address, who lives with you, what's your relationship with that person, how long has that person been there? And then that's going to get into more complicated things like, what health insurance options are available to you at your employer, and do you think that I'm a good parent? And if you don't think I'm a good parent, why don't you think I'm a good parent? Give me every example that you can possibly think of why I'm not a good parent. And we're going to exclude at trial anything that you failed to include in this document. And the request for production of documents can be even worse because then, someone comes in and says, I want 3 years worth of your bank statements so that I can prove how much money you're actually making so I can get as much child support as I can get out of you. And you have 30 days to pull together all of these documents. It's not fun. And again, if people can get along, then maybe we can avoid part of that process. But so we got 30 days and we pass all this back and forth and we get a couple extensions, and maybe 90 days out, we go back to court. And at that point, we might begin talking about, do we need to schedule a trial, or do we think we have room here to negotiate?
And if that were the case, papers can be signed, et cetera, without necessarily a formal trial.
That is correct. That is correct. We can absolutely settle matters if all parties are in agreement.
Got it. What about early decisions or actions that might end up having a bigger impact on the case later on? Are there some things that people, I don't want to say no-nos, or just, I guess on the positive side too, like certain things you should do, it'll make it easier later, or certain things you shouldn't do because that's going to cause some kind of speed bump later?
I mean, certainly laying out what custody looks like, paying a little child support from the outset helps. If someone, so when there's a temporary custody agreement, when there's a temporary custody order, the order doesn't get changed again, or at least it's not supposed to get changed. So we don't get one temporary followed by another temporary followed by another temporary. So if there's an agreement from the outset that the temporary is going to be every other weekend, it's going to stay every other weekend. And if it becomes until trial. So if it becomes a long and drawn out messy case that takes 1.5 years to resolve, then that every other weekend continues, and you lose out on a lot of time.
Oh my God, that sounds awful. 1 year. But it happens, right?
It does happen. So from a timeline standpoint, when papers are initially filed, you serve the other side. It takes the attorney a couple weeks maybe to write up some papers, then things get filed, then maybe it takes the sheriff another week to get someone served, and then they get 30 days to file a response, and then they file a counterclaim, and so you get 30 days to file a response to their counterclaim. And then they file some discovery and you get 30 days to file an answer, and you file some discovery and they get 30 days to file an answer. And so you begin to look at 6 months is probably fast.
Yeah, everything. I mean, because there are things, discovery documents that have to happen. And that if everybody sort of takes their time within the 30-day window, it's going to be like 6 months would be like, hey, perfect.
6 months is probably fast. And then if we start arguing and fighting over things and having a lot of court appearances in between to bicker over stuff, then yes, it can take longer than that.
Where do things typically go wrong? Is there any, like, this again? Or, I mean, I know every case is different, but what trends do you see having done this as long as you have?
I think that I really think if I wanted to take myself out of it philosophically, that people become selfish and they think about what they want and not what's best for their kids. And I think that you see a lot of parents that they now regret the relationship. And so now the other parent is a bad thing for their children, and they forget that their child is bonded to that person. Don't you want that other parent to be the best parent in the world, right? Everybody should have the best daddy in the world, the best mommy in the world, the best whatever the parental relationship looks like, right?
Yeah.
And so now when one parent is painting the other parent to be a bad person, that's really hurtful for the children. And then the kids learn to play the parents against each other, and things just get worse from there. It's so difficult to co-parent and so unusual to find parents that do it well, but it's such a big deal for the kids if they can do that.
Yeah, I'll bet. I'm wondering if, I know you can't name names or any of that, of course, but I'm wondering if if there is a situation, a case that stands out in your mind where, how it started, ended up shaping how it played out. And this could be positive or negative, of course. Anything in your memory bank that's like, oh, or maybe one that surprised, like I thought it was going to be a nightmare and it turned out to be peaches and cream,
Well, I think sometimes that becomes a matter of being honest with their lawyer. Because whether there are good things or whether there are bad things, the lawyer is in a position to manage that. And, we've seen a lot of stuff. But if we don't know about it ahead of time, we're not in a position to deal with it. And then whatever comes from that, it would have been helpful to just know whatever it was. It would have been helpful to just know.
Like, oh, yeah, I guess it's a sort. You're talking about like, oh, surprise! Like, wait, why didn't you tell me this 6 months ago? What kind of things are we talking about?
Oh, criminal history, usually. And
Oh,
it doesn't even necessarily have to be significant criminal history.
right,
Uh, but there was that DWI back in the day, and
sure.
your ex is really concerned about alcohol consumption. And maybe it's not a big deal. Maybe you've been sober for the last 3 years and you're really proud of yourself, or maybe that's something that's embarrassing and you don't want to talk about it or whatever. Well, at this point, let's keep it between you and me. But when it comes up in trial, I would like to be prepared to deal with it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. If you're going to work with an attorney, work with them.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Well, good stuff, Kim. Super interesting. A pleasure talking to you as always. And thank you again for sharing your expertise and point of view. We're out of time, obviously, but I look forward to future conversations.
Fabulous to visit with you. Thank you, Sean.
That's it for today's episode of the Lawyer for Me podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Kim Kollmeyer, visit her website, thelawyerforme.com, and that's the number 4, thelawyerforme.com. Thanks for listening. Maybe leave a review, subscribe to the podcast, share a link with someone in your world who would benefit from this kind of information. That would be much appreciated. I'm Sean O'Connor. Have a great day.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.